We will now unveil why the Nazi regime deeply feared Rudolf Steiner's book, Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, and why they pursued every means to silence the man who authored it. As the Nazi regime rose to power, they recognized this spiritual teacher's work as a direct threat to their control over the German people. In 1935, they dissolved the German Anthroposophical Society. By 1941, they had systematically closed every Waldorf school in occupied territory. They confiscated anthroposophical literature and banned Steiner's educational methods across the Reich. Their goal was clear: eliminate every trace of his systematic approach to developing independent consciousness. But they failed. Rudolf Steiner was no ordinary mystic. He was an academically trained philosopher, holding a doctorate and renowned for editing Goethe's scientific works. By 1922, this visionary Austrian scholar had forged something unprecedented: a systematic science of spiritual development capable of transforming ordinary human consciousness into something far more powerful and autonomous. Knowledge of the Higher Worlds was far more than just another spiritual book on library shelves. It served as a manual for cultivating a form of consciousness utterly intolerable to any authoritarian regime: minds capable of independent thought, direct perception of truth, and a resistance to propaganda and mass manipulation. Rudolf Steiner, born in 1861 in rural Austria, spent his early career as a respected academic, earning recognition for his highly acclaimed philosophical work. For the first 40 years of his life, he moved in intellectual circles where materialistic thinking dominated. By 1922, this Austrian scholar had achieved something that would soon put his life in danger: a systematic method for developing human consciousness that threatened the very foundations of authoritarian control. But Steiner harbored a secret. Since childhood, he had experienced direct perception of spiritual realities that most people couldn't see. Rather than rejecting his academic training, he spent decades working to unite these spiritual experiences with the rigorous methods of natural science. The result was anthroposophy, which literally means wisdom of the human being, a systematic approach to spiritual development that maintained scientific rigor while acknowledging realities beyond the physical world. Steiner insisted that spiritual perception could be developed through precise methods, just as scientific observation required training and discipline. His approach was radical because it democratized spiritual development. Instead of requiring special gifts, mysterious initiations, or blind faith, Steiner provided practical exercises that anyone could undertake. But he was uncompromising about one thing: genuine spiritual development required years of patient ethical work before any expanded abilities would safely emerge. Steiner taught that humans possess multiple levels of being beyond the physical body. The etheric body maintains life processes and vital energy. The astral body carries emotions, desires, and the capacity for sensation. The ego represents individual self-awareness and moral responsibility. Through systematic practice, these usually unconscious aspects of human nature could be developed consciously. This wasn't about gaining supernatural powers, it was about becoming more fully human. Steiner's exercises aimed to refine thinking, deepen empathy, strengthen will, and develop the moral clarity necessary to handle expanded perception responsibly. One of Steiner's most powerful teachings concerned what he called the 12-petaled lotus flower, a spiritual organ of perception located in the heart region. When properly developed through ethical practice, this center allows what Steiner described as clairvoyant knowledge of the disposition of other souls. Let's be clear about what this means. Steiner wasn't promising telepathic mind reading or supernatural abilities. He was describing the natural development of profound empathy and intuitive understanding that emerges when someone has genuinely refined their emotional and mental life. The 12-petaled lotus develops through what Steiner called the 6 subsidiary exercises, systematic practices for gaining conscious control over thoughts, actions, patience, tolerance, faith, and inner equilibrium. These aren't mystical techniques, but practical disciplines for character development. Steiner's students would work with thought control. Instead of suppressing thoughts, they'd learn to direct their mental energy constructively, rather than allowing it to scatter through worry, fantasy, or mental chatter. They practice consistent action, aligning behavior with highest understanding rather than acting impulsively or contrary to their values. The exercise of patience involves maintaining inner calm during difficulties, while tolerance requires understanding different perspectives without losing one's own center. Faith in Steiner's system means trust in the spiritual development process itself, while inner equilibrium involves remaining balanced regardless of external circumstances. Steiner emphasized that this development could only proceed safely when accompanied by genuine moral growth. Without ethical foundation, expanded sensitivity becomes a burden rather than a gift, leading to emotional overwhelm or manipulation rather than service. Most people identify completely with their physical body and ordinary thinking mind, but Steiner's research revealed this represents only a fraction of human nature. Understanding your complete constitution is essential for conscious development. The physical body obviously provides the foundation for earthly existence, but the etheric body, invisible yet essential, maintains all life processes. When the etheric body is strong and organized, health and vitality flourish. When it becomes depleted or disorganized, illness follows. Through specific exercises, the etheric body can be consciously strengthened and refined. The astral body carries emotions, desires, and the capacity for sensation. Unlike the more stable etheric and physical bodies, the astral body is highly mobile and reactive. It extends beyond your physical form, constantly interacting with the astral bodies of others around you. This explains why certain people drain your energy while others energize you, why emotional states can be contagious, and why environments can have such powerful effects on mood and clarity. The ego, what Steiner called the true spiritual individuality, represents your capacity for self-awareness, moral judgment, and individual will. This is the part of you that can say, "I," and take responsibility for your actions and development. Strengthening the ego through conscious practice is the key to spiritual freedom and authentic individuality. But here's what makes Steiner's approach unique. He provided specific exercises for developing each level consciously. Through systematic meditation, artistic practice, and ethical discipline, you can gain increasing conscious control over life forces, emotional patterns, and spiritual perception. This development isn't about escaping the physical world, but about bringing spiritual awareness into ordinary life. Students learn to work consciously with their complete nature, rather than being unconsciously driven by forces they don't understand. The goal isn't to become superhuman, but to become genuinely human, awake, responsive, and capable of conscious participation in your own development and service to others. Every serious student of Steiner's path eventually encounters what he called the guardian of the threshold, a profound confrontation with the accumulated shadow material that resists transformation. This represents one of his most psychologically sophisticated teachings. The guardian isn't some external entity, but the sum total of everything about yourself that you've avoided acknowledging directly. Steiner described it as a being woven together from all the imperfections which have accumulated throughout your development. Every fear, weakness, hidden motivation, and unconscious pattern you've refused to face. This encounter typically occurs when consciousness begins expanding beyond ordinary limitations. As perception develops, you first become aware of the psychological material that has been unconsciously influencing your thoughts, emotions, and actions. This can be profoundly uncomfortable, even disturbing. But Steiner taught that this confrontation serves an essential protective function. Without sufficient self-knowledge and moral development, expanded perception becomes dangerous. Students who attempt to develop spiritual abilities while avoiding their own psychological work become vulnerable to delusion, spiritual inflation, and the misuse of whatever capacities they develop. The guardian ensures that only those prepared for spiritual responsibility can proceed safely. This isn't about perfection. It's about honest self-assessment and the courage to face uncomfortable truths about yourself. When approached with the right attitude, the guardian transforms from obstacle to ally. The energy previously bound up in maintaining unconscious patterns becomes available for conscious development. What seemed like your greatest weakness often contains the seeds of your greatest strength when properly understood and integrated. Steiner's approach differs from purely psychological methods. Rather than analyzing shadow material endlessly, he emphasized developing what he called courage of cognition, the willingness to see truth regardless of how uncomfortable it might be, combined with the moral strength to transform what you discover. Students who successfully navigate this encounter report that it marks a decisive turning point where genuine spiritual maturity begins to emerge. The process isn't easy, but it's essential for authentic development. Perhaps Steiner's most extraordinary claim concerned the Akashic records, what he described as the cosmic memory containing the spiritual history of all events and experiences. Unlike many mystical traditions that speak vaguely about universal knowledge, Steiner provided detailed descriptions of how properly developed perception could access these records. He who has won for himself the power to observe in the spiritual world, that recognizes bygone events in their eternal character, Steiner wrote. He claimed that everything that happens leaves permanent traces in what he called the spiritual substance of the world, accessible to sufficiently developed supersensible perception. Steiner's own research into these records formed the basis for much of his historical and spiritual work, including what he called the Fifth Gospel, spiritual research into aspects of Christ's life not recorded in traditional scriptures. He described this work as requiring intense inner struggle to verify the accuracy of what he was perceiving. The ability to access these records, according to Steiner, develops naturally as supersensible perception unfolds through years of systematic practice. It begins with intuitive insights that suddenly explain current life patterns, gradually expanding to include perception of deeper karmic connections and eventually cosmic memory itself. But Steiner was extremely careful to emphasize that accessing the Akashic records serves spiritual evolution rather than curiosity. This knowledge carries profound responsibility and can only be accessed by those whose motivation is genuine service to humanity's development rather than personal gain or sensationalism. Modern students report that understanding these deeper patterns allows more conscious participation in their own spiritual development, transforming unconscious reactions into conscious choices about how to use each lifetime for maximum growth and service. Whether or not you accept Steiner's claims about the Akashic records literally, his emphasis on developing the capacity for deeper perception and understanding remains valuable for anyone serious about inner development. Steiner condensed his systematic approach to spiritual development into 8 specific practices that form the foundation of all advanced work. These aren't quick techniques for gaining psychic abilities, but rigorous disciplines for character development that create the foundation for safe expansion of consciousness. The first practice, developing sound judgment, requires learning to distinguish between truth and illusion in everyday life. This means questioning assumptions, examining evidence carefully, and developing immunity to wishful thinking or group pressure. Without this foundation, spiritual development becomes a form of self-deception. The second practice, correct action, involves aligning behavior with your highest understanding. When thoughts, feelings, and actions move in harmony, the scattered energy of internal conflict becomes available for development. Students often report that this practice alone begins to generate increased clarity and intuitive insight. The third practice, right speech, means using language consciously to serve truth rather than personal agenda. This includes avoiding gossip, complaining, or empty conversation while speaking honestly and constructively. Conscious speech conserves vital energy while building trust and clear communication. The remaining practices, regulation of outer activity, conformity to natural rhythms, persistent effort toward worthy goals, learning from experience, and regular self-examination, create the stable lifestyle foundation necessary for sustained inner work. Steiner emphasized that these practices must be maintained consistently over years, not weeks or months. Spiritual development follows natural laws just like physical development. It requires patience, persistence, and faith in the process, even when results aren't immediately apparent. Students who maintain these practices report gradual but definite changes, increased emotional stability, enhanced clarity of thought, greater empathy and insight into others, and eventually the emergence of more refined perceptual abilities. But Steiner consistently warned that the moral development must precede and accompany any expansion of consciousness. The goal isn't to gain supernatural powers, but to become more fully human, awake, compassionate, and capable of conscious service in the world. No honest discussion of Steiner's legacy can ignore the controversies that have surrounded his work from the beginning. His teachings attracted both devoted followers and fierce critics, often for complex and contradictory reasons. During the Nazi period, reactions to anthroposophy were remarkably inconsistent. While the regime eventually banned the Anthroposophical Society and closed most Waldorf schools, this wasn't due to uniform opposition. Some high-ranking officials, including Rudolf Hess, were actually supporters of anthroposophical practices. However, others within the regime soon recognized Steiner's philosophy as a profound ideological threat. The ultimate suppression of anthroposophy stemmed from the realization that its tenets fostered an independence of spirit utterly antithetical to totalitarian control. Steiner had created something that no totalitarian system can long tolerate, a method for developing truly free human beings. His systematic exercises for thought control, emotional balance, and spiritual perception produced individuals who could think independently, resist coercion, and access truth directly, rather than passively accepting whatever authorities told them to believe. The fascist regime understood exactly what this meant. A populace trained in Steiner's methods would indeed be immune to the propaganda, fear-mongering, and mass psychology that authoritarian movements depend on. They sought to silence him because his teachings represented the very antithesis of everything they stood for. This suppression undeniably reveals the true significance of knowledge of the higher worlds. This isn't just a spiritual self-help book. It's a potent manual for cultivating the kind of consciousness that authoritarian regimes fear most, awake, autonomous, and profoundly difficult to control. After exploring why the regime sought so desperately to silence Rudolf Steiner and obliterate knowledge of the higher worlds, you now grasp what makes this book so profoundly significant. This isn't merely about accepting or rejecting specific metaphysical claims. It's about recognizing the deeper challenge that systematic spiritual development poses to all forms of authoritarian control. Steiner's path demands intellectual honesty, emotional maturity, and moral courage. It offers no shortcuts, no magical solutions, and no escape from the diligent work of cultivating genuine independence of thought and spirit. But it promises something every totalitarian regime fundamentally dreads: human beings who are difficult to manipulate, control, or deceive, precisely because they have cultivated their own intrinsic capacity for perceiving truth. The regime attempted to suppress Steiner because they understood exactly what his teachings would produce: individuals resilient against propaganda, highly discerning of mass manipulation, and capable of thinking autonomously, regardless of external pressure. They failed to extinguish his work, but the crucial question remains: will you have the courage to embark on the inner development they feared so profoundly? Will you opt for the comfortable dependence of accepting what others tell you to think, or will you cultivate your own innate capacity for direct insight and understanding? Will you remain vulnerable to the manipulation techniques that prey on undeveloped consciousness? Or will you undertake the systematic training that forges genuine inner freedom? The book they attempted to ban is still available today. The methods they endeavored to suppress remain accessible to anyone willing to undertake the necessary work. The question isn't whether Steiner's approach works. The very fact that totalitarian regimes tried so vehemently to destroy it tells us everything we need to know about its potent influence. If you wish to explore this systematic approach that authoritarian regimes found so threatening, acquire your own copy of Knowledge of the Higher Worlds using the link in the description below. This is the book the Nazi regime vigorously fought to eliminate because they understood its true power: creating human beings who cannot be subjugated. Your capacity for independent thought and spiritual perception awaits cultivation. The only question is whether you're ready to undertake the journey they so desperately wish to impede. We kindly invite you to look further beyond the veil of ordinary perception. If this video resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel, liking this video, and sharing it with friends and loved ones. May the light of wisdom guide your path, and may the unity of all life inspire you to greater compassion and understanding.